Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show.
He said he gon' huff and puff and blow my mind up. You meet the island girl, she might Jxxiii wind up.
Welcome to the Deepak Saini Show. I'd like to thank Jxxiii for the intro music. You can find a link to her music in the show description. My guest today is Dr. Howard Rankin. Dr. Rankin has extensive expertise and knowledge in the areas of psychology, neuroscience, behavior change, and neurotechnology. He has worked extensively in the addiction space, running both inpatient and outpatient programs. He's worked as an academic, researcher, and practitioner, and is also an experienced speaker, coach, and best-selling and award-winning author. Dr. Rankin has written 12 books on his own and co-written another 12 and ghost-written 30 others, all nonfiction. He's been described as one of the leaders in behavior change. He's been published in more than 30 scientific articles on addiction and behavior change and been a consultant to the NIH and the World Health Organization. His work has been featured in many newspapers and magazines and has appeared on national networks including CNN, ABC, CBS, BBC, and on The View in 2020. Howard is also a Psychology Today blogger, the creator and host of the How Not to Think podcast, and science director at Intuality AI, which we will talk about. And he also just told me before we start recording, he has a new book coming out. So we'll come back to that. So Howard, thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yeah, great to be here.
It's my pleasure. And you know, neuroscience and psychology, behavior change, all things of high interest to me. I like to start off with, that's, and maybe that was part of your upbringing, but that's not something that kids always necessarily aspire to. So how did you fall into this? How did you get into doing what you're doing?
Yeah, really interesting question, I think, that I think will have relevance to most of the listeners. So as a child growing up, I was fairly creative. I enjoyed writing. I wrote for school magazines and, one time kind of directed the school play and stuff like that. Neither of my parents had really any education, so they didn't really know about education at all. They were amazing people. My mom was an incredibly resilient, adaptive woman whom I thank eternally for giving me those skills. My dad was a really smart guy, but with no education. He was actually a bookie in London, a bookmaker.
Oh, that's interesting. You don't hear that too often.
No, you don't. And he made it very successful for himself. So for somebody who really had no education, we had a pretty nice middle class lifestyle.
Street smarts,
really
not book smarts.
Yeah, exactly. Really, and he had no opportunity. He also had math smarts, which is what you need. He had a betting shop, so people were putting bets on all the time, and particularly at the weekends. There were half a dozen meetings, races going off every few minutes. He had to really keep track of what his exposure was. If he had too many, bets on one horse, he would need to hedge that, and he would do this pretty much all in his mind, mental arithmetic. Amazing stuff. So, none of them knew about education. So I did manage to get into a very good boys' high school in London called Harrow County. It was an all-boys school at the time. And as I approached, I'm coming out, the later years, what am I going to do? And really the only careers, sort of professional careers that my parents knew were like accountants or lawyers and stuff like that. I didn't really know. But there was a teacher in my junior class who was doing a psychology degree at night school. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And he actually introduced me to his professor, and the professor invited me up to talk with him. And I just got fascinated in this. I thought my career would be journalism or writing, to be honest. But I got fascinated in psychology. And then I got into Nottingham University to pursue a degree in psychology. And then I was on my way. And during the course of my career, I went to the University of London Institute of Psychiatry, which was a sort of big place for psychology at that time, way back in the last millennium. Hans Eysenck and all of those people. And got my master's, did my PhD in addictions, stayed on the addiction research unit for about 10 years, then got a little tired of the addiction environment and opportunity. I got recruited to a private hospital in Northampton, England, which was Princess Diana's hometown. And I mention that because we opened a new wing of the hospital named after her family, Spencer House, and she came to open it. And I have a very nice picture of me and Princess Diana. In the meantime, during the addiction career, I'd met a guy who was doing addictions and lived in Mississippi. But he had come to a place called Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, and decided it would be a fantastic place to open a sort of behavioral wellness program, a residential program. And he did it, it was successful. And after a while, he invited me to come over to the United States and run that program, which is what I did for about 10 years, great experiment. That actually place has changed hands a couple of times. It's now called Hilton Head Health, and it's still rated one of the best behavioral wellness retreats there is. It's really an outstanding program. And then I went off and did all sorts of other different things. Won't bore the listeners with that. I ran my practice, got into some consulting, started writing books, blah, blah, blah. And then in 2012, I did something inappropriate. I had a very seductive client. She had been sort of trying to seduce me for 4 years. No, actually longer, 7. We worked together for 3. Then we said, no, that's it. We were done well, go find somebody else. She did. I invited her to come back and just chat with me non-professionally, and we did that for about 4 years. One time leaving the office, she kissed me. I didn't push her away. It went downhill. Very consensual, very brief encounter. And about a month later, I get a call from the licensing board saying somebody had filed a complaint against me for sexual misconduct. And 6 months later, they took my license to practice psychology.
Oh, wow.
And it was all over the newspapers locally. So here at this point, I'd lived in Hilton Head for 20 plus years. I was well known, and I'd gone from, very respected professional to pariah. And it was a really challenging experience, as you might imagine.
I can imagine. And Howard, before you go on there, I had no idea. I did a little bit, of course, a little bit of research. That, of course, never came out. Maybe I didn't go far enough back, but I applaud you and appreciate you sharing such a personal and obviously challenging time with the audience. You certainly could have not mentioned it, and I would have not. I wouldn't have been any different. So, please, thank you for sharing. So, please go on.
Yeah, and if you want to end the show now, that's fine too.
No, not at all. Not at all.
But that was one of the things that I learned. Okay. So initially, I was mad at myself. I was frustrated. I had revenge fantasies. This was a ridiculous decision. The chairman of the board lied to the newspaper. He said it was a cut and dried, he agreed that he had this relationship. But she was a former client. She hadn't been a client for 4 years, and so there was a lot of misleading stuff. And then at one point, probably a couple months in, I made a decision. And I said, I've got to absolutely let go of this. I was filing an appeal. I got to let go. I've got to move on. And, I asked myself the question, if in 3 years or 5 years, this was the best thing that ever happened to me, what would I have to do now? And that was an unbelievably good decision. I left it behind. Subsequently, I've known so many people in different fields where they feel they've been wronged and they want to run, and they spend years and tons of money trying to prove they were right. And sometimes you hear, and I understand this because terrible things happen to people. And you hear somebody say, after they're the perpetrator is finally sent to jail after 10 years. They say, finally, I can move on with my life. Wait, you just given 10 years of your life up to this guy? That's crazy. I mean, I understand why, but that's not what you got to do.
No,
And
just imagine the effects on a mental health, physical health, holding on to those things, those grudges and etc. So maybe
oh
you'll
my
get into
gosh,
that more. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the natural thing to do. That is natural. But I had seen that be so destructive. You know, we do live in the golden age of victimhood. And again, I'm not disputing this at all. Horrendous things happen to people, but you can't stay stuck there. You absolutely cannot. And so this was the best decision I ever made. And it's interesting because you reacted exactly, and many people did. What am I going to do? Well, fortunately, at the time, 10 years ago now, you know, there were sites, websites offering freelance things. And, oh, yeah, maybe I could do some freelance writing. Yeah, let's try to do that. And so, you know, people would say, oh, yeah, I'm interested in your project. And I was sensitive at that time. I would say, yeah, but there's something you need to know first. And I would tell them this. One time, a guy called me up, a really interesting guy. He said, I'd like you to work on my book. And, and I said, well, you need to know something. I told him a story. There was a pause, and then he said, well, that's their loss and my gain. Can you imagine how empowering and fantastic that was to hear? But if you're afraid and you don't tell people that, you never get that. You
Good
never
point.
get
Very
that,
good point. Yeah.
right? And that's so rewarding. Like you said, well, that's exact. Thank you for your honesty. People aren't caught up in the, oh, well, you idiot. Why did you do that? I don't want anything to do with you. Thank you for your honesty. That means a lot to me. And that was such an important lesson, because what it means now is there's almost reinforcement not to go around thinking, oh my God, I don't want anyone to know. Or do they know? No, I don't care. I'm honest. I'll tell you. And that gets rid of so much angst and anxiety, and is the right perception. Hey, you can react to it the way you want. That's up to you. But I'm going to tell you. And so empowering. In my career, you know, I interviewed, you know, a number of felons, and every one of them made an excuse. You know,
Yeah.
oh, my lawyer screwed me. Oh, the judge got it wrong. Or, you know, the guys did the, you know, thing with me. They lied about it. Yeah, but, you know, you did walk into a bank with a gun and threaten to shoot people, you know. And the default setting is deny, deny, deny. And that's the worst thing you can do. Absolutely.
Yeah, you need to
Worst.
own up. You need whatever it is, and you know, you use the example of felons, but I mean, we all do this in our everyday lives, like literally everyone, right? And myself included. But you know, I've learned over the years, right? You know, and do my own self development and et cetera, et cetera. It's like it's just better to own up to it, and things are actually a lot better when you do.
Right, right. And in my book, which I wrote about this, Falling to Grace, the Art and Science of Redemption, you know, I compare this, and understandably, you know, with the 5 stages of grief, you know, denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and ultimately acceptance. You have to get to acceptance. Until you get to acceptance, you're stuck and you're fooling yourself.
Yeah.
So that was a great lesson. I started out my freelance writing career, and it's been an amazing, amazing, amazing journey. Met so many wonderful people, loved helping people tell their stories, or, you know, writing things in the self-help genre that would help other people. You know, I've got some nice recognition for doing that. As I say, met some amazing people. I love doing it. And one of the projects I got involved with does involve this predictive analytics company called Intuality AI, where for 30 years now, this guy who's the founder of the company has been combining human intelligence using cognitive biases with data sets to predict events.
Like elections and things like that.
Yeah, elections, financial markets, sports, health applications, and very successful, very successful. Not 100%, of course. But 58% is very successful, very successful. And so we've been developing that. And it's a really, particularly right now, it's a very fascinating area. There's, what's human intelligence, what's artificial intelligence, where do they clash, where do they combine, all of those things.
Absolutely.
So it's really, really fascinating. And I'm just delighted I got involved with them.
Yeah. Howard, I want to go back to, well, one burning question that I had no idea would come up, but so let me ask that, and then I'll come back to something you said just a moment ago. So I'm just curious, and probably the audiences as well. So this incident that happened with the board and everything, and I mentioned in the bio at the top of the show, all these, CNN and ABC and all these wonderful platforms. I'm just curious, what was the timing? Was all this stuff came out after the fact, or was this all kind of before? I'm just trying to piece together, or is it both, and maybe it didn't really affect you?
Most of the media stuff I done was before this.
Okay.
In my career, before this, few years earlier.
Got it.
I had done some media stuff, but most of that was before that, and none of that media stuff was really about this particular incident.
Yeah, no, fair. No, I didn't know. That's not where I was going. I was just wondering. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And then what I want to come back to is you said just a few minutes ago about the company you're working with now. You said people's cognitive biases, and I think that's I very keyed in on that because, I mean, obviously there's a lot's going on in the world the last 4 years. We all know what's about, type of thing, and I find it very interesting. Again, someone who's not an expert like you, but finds this whole area fascinating to myself, that how many people, we all have them, we all have biases, like, and I think to think you don't just is foolhardy. Like we all have our biases, even recency bias or what have you, right? So, and I've had these conversations with people over the last number of years, and like, oh, I'm not biased, I'm open-minded. I'm like, no, you're not. Sorry,
Right.
But anyway, so I just want to kind of underline that point, that we all have our own biases and whatever they are, and some people have more than others and to various degrees. But anyway, I just want to share that. So yeah, please continue.
Yeah, and on that topic, I think that's true. And what I think wisdom is about is recognizing that. Wisdom is about recognizing your own limitations as well as everyone else's, right? And really not automatically responding and jumping to conclusions. One of the very interesting things, and this is really about consciousness in general, Freud termed the phrase preconscious. And I think a good way of thinking about this is thinking of an iceberg. Okay, and there's the top of the iceberg that you can see, and that's consciousness. And then there's a lot of the iceberg you can't see. Just below the surface is things that you don't typically think about, but you could access if you wanted to, right? So those could be memories, ideas, beliefs, and a lot of those beliefs are at that point. Oh, I believe in this. You never stop and examine, where did I get that idea from?
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It's just a habit, and to me, that would be a really cool technological development if you could put in your belief and find out exactly when you acquired that and how. Oh yeah, I am, this political bent. Yeah, well, you got that 7 years old when your dad told you.
Yeah, no,
you know what I'm saying?
That's such a good point. So two things I want to jump on there. So one, back to the cognitive biases, like I think it's important for us to realize our own biases, and also to be open and frank with others to where their biases are. And then once we know that, and we can agree, then we can have a real conversation and agree to disagree on certain things and find commonality. But if both parties, and I'm using a simplified example of just two people, of course, but if both parties, feel they have no biases, like that's why we have, I think, some of the, divisiveness that we have in society, because it's like,
right.
And then to your second point there, or the point you just made is, yeah, like, where did this come from? Because my parents said this. Where did they get it from? Because grandpa did this. and whatever. I remember this. It's not quite the same, but this, I don't know why it just popped in my head. My mom is from Austria, so my grandfather fought in World War II, but of course he was subscribed, to fight. Austria was taken over, and he had to fight with the Nazis, right? And he was on the Russian front. And I remember, when my mom, immigrated to Canada here, and I was born here in Canada, and going to visit, and my grandpa died when I was pretty young, so I didn't get to know him too much. But I remember one of the last time, might have been the last time I saw him, and he didn't speak English, so it was very hard to translate. But he was always very wary of Americans and Russians, and I think the Russians is because he fought on the Russian front, and Americans because he just had this notion of whatever of coming out of World War II, and obviously we don't need to do a history lesson here, but the U.S. made the rules. A lot of the rules were made out of World War II, and he was but in then how does that skew my mom and my aunt's view, and then
Absolutely.
So just to your point, it's like it can be multi-generational, and certainly when we're children, especially when we're in that impressionable age. So let me ask you this question, and please, if I cut you off and you didn't finish your last thought, please go back to that. But the question I'm going to ask is like, how logical are humans actually?
Well, I have a phrase which I quoted a long time. People aren't logical, they're psychological, often with the emphasis on the psycho. Okay.
I think we're seeing that more and more every day, right?
Right. And so we're not logical. Human beings are storytellers, rationalizers. They're rationalizers. And again, a book that I wrote a couple of years ago was, I Think, Therefore I'm Wrong, which explores this. We're rationalizers and storytellers. Human beings can rationalize anything. Okay. And in some ways, rationality and logic is overrated. Okay. Because it's not the rationality and logic, it's the assumptions you start with, right? So, for example, if I believe this lamp is telling me to do satanic things, it's perfectly logical for me to turn it off. Right? But that doesn't address the problem, which is, I've got this psychotic idea, right? So human beings are not logical. Okay, they can be. And of course, they can be when they want to be. Again, it's all about justification. And I think it's really important to understand that it's all about justification and rationalization. And that it's, as I say, you can justify anything. And one of the problems with social media is social proof. Now you can find anyone, any group of people who believe exactly what you do, and that reinforces your notion. You see, I'm right. We get reinforcement for that.
Yeah, I'll just jump. Funny enough, just I'll just share this. My daughter's wants to get a phone, and I'm a little bit resistant. My wife's a little bit more open to it because of some accessibility and et cetera, et cetera. So we made her watch. This is just recently, The Social Dilemma, that movie. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've seen it. Yes, very good.
I mean, it's a bit dated now. It's only 3-4 years old, and it's a bit dated in some aspects, but for generally the concepts. But again, you said a moment ago, like, we can find anyone who can, and I just want to. The reason I bring this up is like, it's not only we find, it's like, it's being thrust in our face. We might not even be looking for people like us. They're showing us, or they're telling us, these are people that are reinforcing your ideas based on some algorithm, which, again, to your point earlier, is just a bunch of assumptions, right? That's all an algorithm is, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. Just a bunch of assumptions. Oh, these people in this area, of this demographic, they tend to be like this. Oh, they'll want to see this. Yeah. I mean, manipulation is really what it is. And that I find frustrating. There's so much manipulation going on. It just aggravates the hell out of me.
Absolutely. We could do just a podcast just on that alone, but let's move on. So we talked about the logical. So what is intelligence?
That's a really good question. So intelligence isn't the abandonment of logic, but it certainly embraces what we might call creativity. You know, the ability just to think outside the box, literally, because what we've been talking about, stereotypes, beliefs, not questioning them is really the box. The box is us in. Intelligence is about thinking outside the box. It is not knowledge. My knowledge is helpful, but it is not knowledge. There is a difference between knowledge and intelligence. And intelligence is being able to go beyond the obvious and standard perceptions and see things in a slightly, or more than that, different way. That's what intelligence is, I believe.
Let me ask you two things here. So first is going back to our talk a few minutes ago about talking about biases. So there obviously is very knowledgeable people in the definition you're giving here, or whatever. But if you throw in their biases, does that make them, and that's obviously not binary, but does it make them not intelligent potentially, or more intelligent if you embrace your biases or not embrace your biases?
Yeah, and here's we need to understand something about cognitive biases. In some senses, the word bias is in itself misleading. All right. So one of the big biases is confirmation bias, which is looking for proof and evidence for your position. Well, that in itself is a good cognitive strategy. Why wouldn't you look for evidence to justify it? So actually, that bias is only a bias when it becomes misused. And then you only look for the things that you want to look for. But the notion of seeking confirmation of something is a perfectly logical and reasonable strategy, right? It's when it gets misused. And the same could be said about really important ones. Availability bias. The availability bias is, focusing too much on what's simply in front of you and available, or the information you have. But what sometimes is most important is the exformation, the information you don't have, right? So if you just get stuck on the availability bias, you could be misled, right? So for example, police show up at a crime scene and they smell alcohol and they go down the rabbit hole, creating all of their theories about what happened around alcohol. Well, what would happen if there were other clues there? That would be different. Perhaps the alcohol is not relevant, and that's where the intelligence comes in, is being able to identify potentially what are the important cues, but what's missing too, right? What's missing?
Absolutely. Okay, then the second part on that question is, so I guess I'll just tell the question first, then I'll describe the situation that's making things. So, okay, my question is would you consider this intelligence? So quite often when I do my meditation, various different pieces of information come to me. They're in my conscious, my subconscious, whatever. And I'm pretty decent at this, actually, is like putting things together, like, oh, I'm looking for this solution. I forgot that this person is an expert in this. I should go talk to them, or oh, what if I tried this from some other field in combination with this field? Would this work in something to try it? Now, that doesn't mean it works out or whatever, but would you consider that intelligence?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Again, I'm intelligent. I can tell my mother-in-law now.
Yeah, yes, you can. You're very intelligent. But let's think about that in terms of what I said in terms of creativity and also the brain. All right. So, the brain, has a demand for energy, and most people probably have read that it takes up 25% of all the energy you use. So it's energy conserving, but it uses a lot of energy, right? So there are different brain states. Just simply, let's look at four characteristic and classic brain waves. You've got delta, 1 to 4 cycles per second, sleep, deep sleep. Theta, 5 to 8 cycles per second, light sleep, and probably deep meditation. Right? Alpha, 8 to 13 cycles, relaxed wakefulness. Okay. then 13 to 30 cycles and above, sometimes theta, when you are in processing. Okay, when you're working on something, you're focused on it, you're trying to put it together, your logic, and you're really doing a task. Okay. Now, the cultural message is, oh, you got to be in beta wave all the time. You got to be in that processing. You got to be productive. Otherwise, you won't get anything done. And unfortunately, what happens is in education, kids, go from play, which is alpha and theta, into beta and are told, no, you got to be doing this all the time. Or they used to be told that. And that's wrong. Yes, you need it some of the time, but what you also need is these more relaxed states, like your meditative state, when suddenly these things that are in you, just kind of below the surface of your consciousness, suddenly come together in a meaningful way, right? And to me, that has become much more relevant recently when I met and interviewed a couple of times on my podcast a guy called John Leaf, Lieff, who has written this amazing book called The Secret Language of Cells.
I'm gonna have to check that out.
Oh yeah, please do. And if you get a chance to have him on your podcast, I would recommend it. It's
okay,
amazing.
we'll talk afterwards. You can hook me up with him, I guess.
Yeah. But it's amazing stuff about this mind-body. And in a way, the mind-body distinction is false.
Oh, I don't like that. The mind is part of the body. It's all one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all one. And part of that is his research and summarizing of the latest research in cells and cellular communication will blow your mind how virtually every cell in the body has tremendous power in communicating in a really effective way. Some of this is done wirelessly. Okay. Now there's an interesting one, because we used to say, well, there's only 40,000 connections between the heart and the brain, so there's really not much communication going on. But wait a minute, if some of that's done wirelessly, you have to review that, right? Some of it follows quantum mechanic rules, which is mind-blowing. Can be in different places at different time. I mean, amazing stuff. And so when you hear this and you read it, and The Secret Language of Cells is a great book. He did a really good job, as much as one can, in making it readable for the person who doesn't know really much about biology. But this is an incredibly complex system, way more than we imagine that's going on. And this actually, if you like, in many ways is our intelligence, because it is keeping store of all our experiences and what has worked and what hasn't worked, our habits and all of that. This underpins us. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect. Of course not. But that's what pops into consciousness. It'll send something into your head. Oh, watch out for this, or whatever, do that. And here's something very important about awareness. There's two things. One is you can be simply aware of what's going on, right? Or you could actually be manipulating it consciously, trying to do it. The difference between awareness and agency, right? And I like the quote of Joe Montana, San Francisco quarterback. He said, when I was playing, I wasn't conscious. Well, he didn't mean he was in a coma. He meant he was so well practiced, he didn't have to manipulate. He was aware what he was doing, but his mind body was just doing it automatically. And we do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and we don't necessarily need to go down this path, but that kind of just reminds me of, and I mean, it's maybe a term that's overused nowadays, but like flow, being in flow.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Well, I think that's what flow means, is that you've practiced something so well that now this infrastructure in your brain has built up and it has taken over, and you don't have to think about it. And that works both ways in terms of behavior. That could make you an awesome, football player, or it can make you an awesome drug addict or alcoholic.
No, fair enough.
Right. Okay.
Fair enough.
And yeah.
Oh, sorry, Howard. I didn't mean to start with that. I just want to go back to the book you mentioned there by Leaf. It kind of reminds me of, and I don't know if it's the same, but I think there's a book. I might hopefully give them the title right. The Secret Language of Trees, and how
yes,
they communicate, and all through the root network, and very vast and like very fascinating stuff. Very fascinating stuff.
And it's related to that because part of the subtitle was, what microbiology tells us about, life in general. Sure. And absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing stuff, isn't it? How these plants and trees interact with each other in a way that we have no clue.
Yeah,
Would
absolutely.
Imagine that.
So Howard, we're getting a little long here, but there's one area I want to hit before my last few questions for today. But we kind of came up earlier. So about artificial intelligence, it's a big topic. It's just getting bigger and bigger. Now there's almost an anti-AI movement and that sort of thing. So I guess maybe generally, like what are your thoughts on AI? And then I guess maybe more as a more finer tuned question, like, can human and artificial intelligence or computer intelligence, whatever you want to call it, can they be combined?
Yes.
Well, maybe, sorry, this is a terrible question because I'm doing a three-parter here. Should they be combined?
Yes. Well, first of all, there is a lot of hype around AI. Okay. And so you see this in the news. You say, AI has come up with a new cure for cancer. Now, wait a minute. It was programmed by human beings who did the research on cancer. It's a tool. Some robot didn't get up in the middle of the night, do the research, and decide to run it. It didn't do that. It's a tool, right? And as much as we might be concerned about it, there's really not a lot of evidence so far that computers or AI is sentient at all. Which, given the things that we just said about the secret language of cells and intelligence and understanding that, in 1967, a guy called Hubert Dreyfus, a professor of philosophy, wrote a paper called "Why Computers Need Bodies in Order to Be Intelligent." And that was his point, that wisdom was about experience, not logic and knowledge, right? And I think that really still applies very much. But obviously the massive and fast processing of data is a great tool, And so you can combine it. And, what we at Intuality have done is taken different data streams and then run them through a program that incorporates 12 cognitive biases. In other words, to get it to think like a human thinks and come up with predictions. And it's been very successful in predicting something that AI doesn't do. It's been very successful in predicting everything from financial markets, sports, health applications, those sorts of things. And so I think the way ahead is a combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence. Actually, it is that anyway, because humans are training these things to begin with. So it's there. But looking for the best of both, I think, is really important. And I think it's possible. And I think that's the way forward. But we do have to be careful about the idealization of, any computer technology is somehow mystical and magical. It isn't. It's trained, it's got value, but it's not the same. It can't do what we do.
Absolutely. Howard, I don't want to put you on the spot here, and this is just popped in my head. So if you could, please, if you want to defer, that's fine. But I'm just curious if there's one example of a prediction that you guys made that would have maybe came true, that would maybe have been a surprise to everyone else, whether it be election or sporting or whatever's, or something. Again, historical. I'm not trying to get anything out of it.
No, in the elections, we've been pretty accurate and determining fairly early on who the winners were. So I think that was good. One of the areas that I think is really promising, obviously the financial markets appeals to a lot of people if you can be ahead of that, and we've got a pretty good record in that too. But one of the areas that I'm excited about is medical application. And we did some research which showed that our predictions would increase the time of an alert before somebody had a seizure. Okay, so at the time we did that research, the current technology was, well, we can tell you're going to get a seizure in a few seconds, okay, which is not a lot of time. And we were able to do it and extend that out to like a couple of minutes. Now that's a big difference. If you get an alert and say, oh man, you're going to get a seizure in 2 minutes, okay, let's just lay down, and keep out of trouble, get ready, get prepared. That's fantastic. Monitoring.
Is that via like a wearable or something, or how
Yeah,
would that
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So monitoring your health stats is valuable, but it's nothing like as predicting it significantly enough in advance, you can actually do something about it. It's one thing to say, oh yeah, my blood pressure's going up. Oh yeah. And then you have a stroke and they said, oh yeah, we saw the blood pressure going up. It will be another to say, yeah, your blood pressure got, there's an alert. You need to do something, stroke imminent. And there's the difference between just collecting a lot of information, but actually then able to use it in a predictive capacity.
That reminds me, and I might be getting this slightly wrong because this is like 5 or 6 years ago. I was pre-COVID, so doing things in person, right? I was at a reception of some sort, meeting hosted by a higher level educational institute, and there was a group there, and I think they were funded by the university or whatever. That's why they were there. But they were for known people with epilepsy. They were trying to do something where it was some, I don't know how you would call this invasive, but it was supposedly invasive, but it was still like putting some sort of wiring to the brain that would alert the person or trigger, like, again, I don't know how the time frame, I can't recall the details beforehand, and then do an electric current to a different part to actually stop the seizure or minimize it. So you're shaking your head, you've heard of this before. And I thought that was like, that's very interesting, but I don't want a wire or a hole in my head going or something to my brain, type of thing. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, the nice thing about Intuality is, there's nothing like that involved. It's a standalone program that you can put in almost any data set. And, that could be anything. A few years ago, before I was involved in it, they used it for predicting breakdown of commercial vehicle tires. So they could predict this tire is going to go flat and would send out a warning, which is, again, enormously helpful. If you can predict any vehicle that may be carrying, dangerous stuff, that, hey, we're predicting breakdowns before they happen. Sure, then we don't have trains, spreading toxic chemicals or trucks doing the same thing.
Yeah. So Howard, I just want to wrap up with the last couple of questions here. So obviously, this is not a podcast focused strictly on health, although that is my area of focus. So I just like to ask, what is your health routine? What does your morning routine look like?
Well, I was been a jogger for most of my life. I turned a particular age a year or so ago and decided that, and it was interesting because I was doing a seminar with a couple of fantastic neuro scientists that I know, Dean and Jxxiii, wonderful people. They've written a book on lifestyle and how that impacts, Alzheimer's and cognitive decline. And Aisha said to somebody in the audience, well, it's okay, jogging once or twice a week, but if the other 5 days you're just sitting on your butt, that's not good. And I thought, you know what? She's right. I would rather walk 4 or 5 miles 5 or 6 times a week than jog 4 or 5 miles twice a week. I think that's better.
Absolutely fantastic. Yeah.
And so I do that, and get good amount of steps. I do think that's important. Health. Obviously, I'm still very engaged in a lot of things I do, so I get a lot of mental stimulation. Socially, I try to do that. My sleep is good. About 4 years ago, I switched over to, well, I stopped eating processed meats and kind of meat in generally and moved to a much more natural plant-based diet. And that unquestionably helped me, unquestionably. So I do a lot of the things that, are recommended. And again, you say, well, all these are behavioral things to do with your body. But if you think back to the conversation we had about, hey, your body is really important to your mental health as well as your physical health, that's what you need to be doing. And I personally believe that in terms of mental health, if you were to choose one thing you could do to improve it, it's physical activity. There's no question.
Yeah, I mean, the science is proving that out continuously. So, okay, last question then, Howard. Let's maybe keep it on the health bent.
Okay.
But if you could go back and talk to your younger self, maybe it's when you were 20, maybe it was, just even 10 years or whatever, like what advice would you like? Hey, buddy, do this now, or whatever.
I think definitely earlier on in my life, if I was 20, I wish somebody would have taken me and shaken me and said, Howard, stop being so damn nice. Okay. Your boundaries, you want to help everybody, and that's all very well and good, but you need to set boundaries. And I knew that then, but it took me a long time to do it. And part of that was, I mentioned my parents, they were awesome. My dad was a great dad, but he could get very stressed out. And so there was a lot of, oh, shit, you have to be careful, be careful. And I think that made me a bit into someone who was very mindful of other people's mindsets and don't disturb them and be nice to them. And I think that developed me into a bit, maybe a little codependent, but those boundaries, it took me a long time to develop them. Really.
That I love that answer, Howard, and you might be the first person on the podcast who's answered that way. And I think that's super important because when I work with clients, whatever their issue is, quite often it breaks down to boundaries at work, boundaries with their family members, boundaries around food, and all the biases and our early programming, all the things we touched upon earlier in the conversations. I love that answer. So just for the audience, Howard does have a free download gift that he'd like to give everyone. The link will be in the show notes there. It's a free workbook on behavior change, which we all have something to work on, right? We all have something to work on. So Howard, last word, what's your last words of wisdom or golden nugget that you'd like to share with the audience?
I think part of it is always try, because it's progress, not perfection. You never reach, Buddha says it takes 35 lifetimes. I don't know, but always be aware of your own perceptions and biases. I think that's really, really important. And that's where I think meditation and mindfulness comes in, where you can separate yourself out from not just your feelings, but your thoughts, and see them as they aren't me. They aren't me. They're separate from me. They're going through me. I don't have to accept them, right? I can stand back from them. And I have a really good story, if we got time, about a student who was learning meditation with his guru, and they were in a session, and halfway through he looked up and the guru was kind of smiling and scowling. And after the session was over, the student said, do you mind if I ask you this? I looked up and at one point you were scowling and smiling. And the guru said, oh yeah, I was laughing at my anger. Wow. If you can distance yourself like that and recognize that emotion isn't you, your body is reacting like that, but you don't have to accept it. That is so powerful. That is so powerful.
I love that answer. I love that. Thank you, Howard. Yeah, it's been wonderful for all this may I think we've been an hour now or something like that, supposed to. Fantastic. I could talk to you for another hour, so maybe, and I kind of teased at the beginning, we never got back to it, so maybe we have to do a round two. But you have a new book that's coming out, or you're working on right now, so maybe when that comes out we can have you back on. But thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to throw it back to Jxxiii to guide us out with some music. Thanks for listening to the Deepak Saini Show. Exceptional results for the exceptional you. Take care.
Podcast produced by the Minted Green Company